So good morning, everybody. I was very excited to do some of the visits with this conference and see all of the excitement around multi-sided platforms. And my research today will talk about some issues in managing a multi-sided platform. Well, let me first define what a multi-sided platform is. A multi-sided platform is something that joins multiple sets of stakeholders. Okay, so we've seen many examples of this where you have customers and you have drivers in the case of Uber, or you have customers and you have rooms in the case of Airbnb. But I think there's some very important questions around how to manage this multi-sided platform. So if you're in the position of someone at the platform, how do you manage it? All right, so that's the broad topic today. So there's going to be two parts to this speech. The first part is going to talk about the answer to a very specific problem of promotion. Okay, so how do you promote one set of stakeholders to another set of stakeholders in the network? So this is brand new research. This research will be presented. This is the first time this research has been presented. It's been accepted at a very prestigious computer science conference, and this right now that conference is going on out in Vancouver, Canada, and I think this paper is going to be presented there tomorrow by some co-authors. So you're the first people who get to see this work. In computer science, the conferences are as good as the journals. So in marketing, we present at a conference when we first start out. But in computer science, this is kind of like the final version. There will not be another version of this. Now, I think what I've done here leaves some unanswered questions. And so in the second half of the talk, I'm going to step back and reflect on those unanswered questions. I don't have the perfect answer yet, so I'm very eager to get your feedback. But I think we've made good progress towards answering those questions. So let me start with this very specific contribution. Let me begin with what a recommendation system is. A recommendation system it consists of the tools, methods, the algorithms that help users find items of use to them. That is the definition that's given in the recommendation system handbook. So it's helping users find things that are of use to them. So we've all experienced them. When you go to Amazon, it recommends items that it thinks you will want. When you use Pandora or Spotify, it recommends songs that it thinks you will like. When you go to Netflix, it recommends movies that it thinks you will like. The field of recommendation systems has been very active for the past 20, 25 years. But most of the research has focused on one stakeholder. Okay, the stakeholder is the user. So the definition I gave you only cares about one stakeholder. What songs will you like? What movies will you like? All of this is being disrupted by these multi-sided platforms where now you have multiple stakeholders that you have to consider. So the situation that I'm thinking about involves multiple retailers. Okay, so if you have a platform that matches consumers to retailers. So Google Express has just been launched, which is one such platform. You could think about Amazon Marketplace is another example that's matching vendors with customers. The very specific example that I have is a company in the U.S. called ShopRunner. And so ShopRunner is a platform with about 180 major retailers. So this is all the big department stores, Neiman Marcus, Saks, Bloomingdale's, as well as specialized retailers like Kate Spade, Ann Taylor, Newegg, which is a computer vendor. Okay, so 180 different retailers, about 10 million customers. All right, so if you use a traditional recommendation system, okay, ShopRunner sends out, for example, promotional emails recommending retailers, brands, offers, and you only pay attention to one stakeholder, namely the user, there will be a problem because some retailers will never get recommended, right? So, I'm going to argue that it's in the interest of ShopRunner to keep the retailers happy as well, because if I'm never recommended, then there's no reason for me to be part of this network, and I'm going to leave. And if I leave, there will be fewer items, in your cumulative offering, and that will be a problem. So this work is meant to address that question. How can I find items that a user wants and at the same time considers the needs of the stakeholder of retailers? So we need a brand new type of recommendation system. I'll just mention there was a conceptual article by one of my co-authors, Robin Burke, published just last year that kind of lays out the framework for thinking about multiple stakeholders, but that was purely conceptual. This is the first methodological contribution that addresses that. Okay, so managing, that's basically what I just said. So our goal is to produce a model that balances those two things out. So we propose a constrained optimization model to produce what's called a top K list. So in the recommendation system literature, a top K list is where you are recommended K items. So you've all experienced this. If you're in Amazon and it recommends 10 items at the bottom of the screen, that is a top 10 list. When you go to Netflix and they recommend that could be a top 40 list, whatever. So in my case, I'm considering, for example, a promotional email. So they send out emails several times a week recommending 10 things to me. Another situation where this comes up is in a packing list. So let's say I have placed an order through ShopRunner. ShopRunner will send a confirmation email, and it will say your jacket will arrive on Tuesday, and then at the bottom there will be 10 offers in hopes of generating an additional sale. So that would be another situation where you have a top K list that you must generate. So what we're going to do is propose a post-processing step. Okay, so what I mean by that is this is going to be a system that you can add on to an existing recommendation system. So you may have a recommendation system that estimates how much a consumer will like an item. This is something that you can add on at the end to adjust those recommendations. Okay, so it's a very easy thing for companies to use because they already have their recommendation system built. This is something you slap on at the end to refine it. All right, so I'm going to talk about our model, and then we are going to look at some empirical evaluations of this model. So a little bit of notation. Traditional notation for a recommendation system, you've got basically three things going on. You have users, items, and ratings. So U is going to be a set of users. In the case of ShopRunner, you have 10 million users. Those would be customers. You have items and you have retailers in this case. So and we have 180 retailers. Each one of those retailers have any number of items. So a large department store would have thousands or tens of thousands of unique items. And you can also all right. I'm going to make a big assumption. The assumption is that user utilities have already been estimated. Okay, so what Uij is, it's the utility that user J has for item I. So if this is a jacket, this is one item, my U hats of J would be, how much utility I have for this jacket. And she may have a completely different utility for this jacket. So these U hat IJs have come from an existing recommendation system, so I don't care what it is. It could be a collaborative filtering system, it could be a content-based system, it can be a matrix factorization-based approach. Just use the last 20 years of research in that area to get those U hats. So we're going to dodge that issue. All right, so let me talk to you about the way we're going to handle this. I'm working with a PhD student who's an expert in optimization, and so this is like right in her what she's good at. We're going to propose an optimization system. So again, picture this situation where you're going to send out 20,000 emails today across 20,000 customers who've just placed an order, or 20,000 customers who are going to have a promotional email today. And I need to figure out which retailers do I recommend to each customer. Okay, so here's the optimization problem. This is an integer programming problem. So what integer programming means is that your decision variables are going to be integers. Integer programming problems are very difficult because you can't use smooth optimization approaches like with simplex methods and those. So they're computationally very hard. Xij up there is a decision variable. It takes the value 1 if we recommend item I to user J. It takes the value 0 if I don't recommend that item to a particular user. All right, so what I want to do is just maximize customer's utility. That's the way to think about that objective function. So we're going to multiply the user's utility by whether or not the item is recommended. And so every item that gets recommended, you multiply by 1, and so then the sum of that is just the total utility. And if we just stopped here, this is what a traditional recommendation system does. Maximizes the customer's utility. I haven't mentioned any other stakeholder at this point. Okay, now we have a whole set of constraints that we have to worry about. The first constraint simply says, I'm going to recommend K items. So in this email I have a space for 10 items, therefore the sum of my Xij's for a particular user is going to be 10. This next constraint is what's new. Okay, so this next constraint basically says, I'm going to put an additional constraint on here that the fraction or the number of times, you can do it either way, fraction or number, of times that a retailer R gets recommended must exceed some threshold value, alpha sub R. Okay? So this alpha sub R comes from above. All right? In fact, this is going to be the topic of what I'm going to talk about next, which is where these alpha sub R's come from. Okay, so for now, just think of it as a tuning parameter that the MSP has control over. So it's like how much love do I want to show to a particular retailer? So if I want to show a lot of love to a retailer, I dial up their alpha sub R. If I don't care about that retailer, I turn down the alpha sub R. All right. So this is coming from above. We'll talk about where they come from next. The last constraint is just that we have an integer solution. So my decision variable X can only be a 0 or 1. So either I recommend something or I don't. There's nothing in between. And again, that makes this computationally extremely hard. All right. So to help us wrap our head around this problem, let me give you just a tiny example. So this is very typical, except it's way too small and way too dense. So let's say I have 3 users. So these would be different customers. And then I have a very simple platform. I only have 2 retailers. So retailer 1 and retailer 2. And these retailers are really small. The first retailer only offers 3 items, right? And the second retailer offers 3 completely different items. Now again, in real life, this would have, it could be hundreds of millions of rows, and hundreds of millions of columns in the case of an Amazon or something. All right, so our task is to construct a top 2 list. So I get to recommend 2 items to each one of those users. Well, let's just start out with what we would do today. So what we would do today is pick the items that would maximize the utility for the customer. Forget about the retail. And so what you're going to see is that we're going to say in the email to customer 1, you would really like item 1 and you would really like item 3. That has utility 10. Okay, so we can start tallying the total utility. And then for this customer, okay, we have a total utility of 10, and for here we have a total utility of 8. So in total, the objective function value is 28 in this little case. All right. But I hope you all see the problem, right? Retailer 2 is not very happy because retailer 2 has no recommendations. All right, so what we're going to do is dial up. So alpha sub 2 is going to be half the time retailer 2 has to get mentioned. All right? So now if you put this in, you're going to see that the way I can achieve this is, I'm going to sacrifice a little bit of utility by recommending items 4 and 5 to customer 3. So notice your objective function value has gone from 28 to 26. So it's not quite as good, but it's almost as good. I'm sacrificing just a little bit of utility. But I'm going to say there's a problem with this solution as well. The problem is lack of diversity. Okay, so diversity is kind of a soft objective function within recommendation systems, where when I give you a list of items, if all the items are very similar to each other, you're going to find my recommendation system very boring. And so what's important with recommendation systems in the long term is to find some diversity within the list. So when you get a recommendation from Netflix, if they know you like a certain director, they don't just show you movies only from that director. They'll mix in some titles from other directors, just to kind of explore your interests. Okay, so that's often called the diversity problem. And so we could introduce a diversity constraint as well. And so I'll send you the paper. Anybody's interested in this, send me an email and I will send you the published paper on this. We introduced some additional constraints here that force diversity in the top K lists. Okay, so if we introduce the diversity, for example, here's a situation where I'm going to go to an extreme and say, half the items have to be from retailer 1, half from retailer 2. This is the best solution we can come up with. And you're going to see we've sacrificed some utility. So we went from 28 to 26. You can do the math here, that's 22, it looks like. But this could be a better set of recommendations because they're more diverse. All right, so that's the basic idea. Now, I mentioned to you that this is a very hard problem. Okay, so it's a very hard problem computationally. So these integer programming problems are often NP hard, which means as the size of the problem grows, the computational complexity will increase exponentially. So you can't really solve these except for very small problems in real time. So you have to find a way to approximate the solution so that you can use more efficient ways that work on much bigger problems. So a very standard technique in optimization is you put the constraints in the objective function through some Lagrangian multipliers. and you turn it into a continuous problem that you can use gradient-based methods to solve. All right, so the way to think about this is, problem as it's stated is too hard. We're going to introduce an approximation. The approximation may not be the best solution. You're not guaranteed the optimal solution anymore, but you hope it's pretty good. Okay, so that's going to be one of the things I'm going to evaluate in our empirical work is how good is this approximation? So what's going to happen is we're going to look at some fairly small problems where we can use integer programming optimization software to find the best answer. Okay, so now I know the gold standard best answer. Then what I'm going to do is use my relaxation, my approximation, to try to find the best, approximate answer to this, and we'll look at how far off is my best answer from the approximate answer. So that's one of the research questions that we're going to address in this is how good is this approximation? Okay, so we're going to use two data sets. The first data set is the movie lens data set. How many of you know about movie lens? Okay, one person. I'll give you a little bit of history on movie lens. This was a movie recommendation system created back in the 90s. It was by a company, and the company went bankrupt. And the University of Minnesota acquired all of the data from this bankrupt company. So they had, tens of thousands of people who rated, thousands of movies, and this was like a gold mine for the University of Minnesota because they had, an active system that they could test different recommendation algorithms on. And so when you look at the recommendation system literature, a large fraction is from people at University of Minnesota because they had this active laboratory of real consumers. And so a lot of the algorithms that are just commonplace today were developed and tested on movie lens data. So whenever you go to a recommendation systems conference, I'm going to joke that half the papers are going to be recommended on movie lens data. They've also been extremely generous with their data. So they publish it on their website, and any researcher can download it, and it becomes kind of a benchmark data set because everybody has analyzed it, and all the people in this field know it very well. All right, so we're going to use the movie lens 100,000 data set. So we have 100,000 ratings from 1,000 users on 1,700 movies. Now, we're going to use this just for testing purposes, and I'm going to picture that we have a fictitious platform, so something like a Fandango. So picture, in my mind, maybe I have different websites that will rent me movies, and different websites show different movies, and then I have all these consumers that might come to that website to get recommended some movie that they may like. All right. So that's the setup I'm going to have. So different movies are shown at different providers, and what I mean by that is picture a website that would rent me a movie. All right, and so the goals of this are to understand basically what I illustrated in my little toy example. So when I start putting these constraints, these provider-side constraints on there, how much user utility is lost? We saw how it dropped from 28 to 26. And then if I start imposing additional constraints for diversity, how much further does stuff get worse? Second big question for us is this whole issue of the approximation. How much is lost through the approximation? Because that's the first data set. The second data set comes from this is real data, from the shoprunner.com that I mentioned to you earlier. All right, we're going to have a series of models. Okay, so this looks horribly complicated, I know. My PhD student is not very She likes her symbols, let me put it that way. M0 is going to be the unconstrained model, which is what we have today. So M0 is, forget the providers, I'm just going to try to maximize customer utility. M1 is that first solution that I gave you where I start imposing some provider constraints that, I have an alpha R that tells me how often a retailer should get recommended. Now we're going to play around with this, and so we're going to have scenario 1.1 is where I have very small alphas, so I'm not going to interfere too much with the best solution. Then we're going to have a stronger set of constraints where I dial up those alphas of R's to try to make sure that all providers get a more equal distribution of recommendations. Okay, then I'm going to do provider-specific recommendations where maybe there's some weak retailers that I want to give some extra help to. Okay, so they're the big ones that they don't need any help. In the case of my shop runner data, it's going to turn out the big department stores, so Neiman Marcus, Saks Fifth Avenue, they don't need any help. They're like, they just suck in customers. But it's the little niche retailers that need to get a little bit of an extra boost. Okay, so with these provider-specific ones, I'm going to dial up the amount of love I show to a niche retailer. All right, then what's going to happen with M2? M2 is going to be where I start throwing in the diversity constraints. Okay, so I'm not allowed to just recommend 10 items all from the same retailer to you. I want some from this retailer, some from this one, and some from this one. I want a little bit more balance across that. So this is kind of, across all the emails I'm going to send today, I want to make sure that retailers get enough love. This is within the email. I want to make sure there's diversity as well. All right. Now, we assigned movies to these fictitious platforms at random. We're going to use two different distributions just to see the differences. We're going to use normal distributions in one scenario. So this is going to be how many movies get assigned to a particular provider. What's probably much more realistic in this setting is going to be power law. Okay, so the power law is going to allow us to capture the notion of having a long tail. There's going to be some very popular movies that are shown a lot, and then there's going to be a long tail where you have more obscure situations. All right. Now, what this set of error bars shows is the number of retailers mentioned in an email with different scenarios. And so this S01 is what you have today. So just, and so low is not so good. We want to have more diversity. And so what you see is when we start adding these constraints, the average number of different providers that get mentioned increases. So it looks like the optimization model is doing something. Now, I've got a lot of numbers here. This is my student made this. What's being shown here, NDCG is one measure of the quality of a recommendation system. Now, what I want you to see up here is how much worse all of S1 and S2 is from 1. Okay, so 1 is going to be the current system. So we're going to normalize everything to, that's the best we could do if we only consider consumers. And then these are the S11, S12 are all of the different scenarios where I've started to introduce provider constraints. And what you can see is that the total utility doesn't decrease much until you get down to this situation S14 where you put a pretty strong set of provider constraints on, and you're going to favor certain ones, the ones out in the long tail. So the point I want to make with this is that you don't lose much in your final utility by doing this post-processing step. Okay, now let's go to the next research question, which is all around how good is this bound? Okay, so we've had to do all this approximation stuff. Do we lose much, from the optimal? So the way to think about this is if you put this into an integer programming software package and you let it run overnight, and you find the optimal solution to these, this is going to be the total utility. So this is the unconstrained model, and again, you don't see much difference as you start putting these constraints on. Now, if you start using this approximation that's necessary in order to solve very big problems, what it's saying is our bounds are not that bad. So you're like 97%, 98% of the optimal, which I think is quite good. For something that we can actually solve, as opposed to only very small problems. And the story is pretty much the same with the power law distributions, suggesting that that the bounds we've proposed are sufficiently good to get us a decent solution. All right, with shop runner data, the situation's going to be slightly simpler in that we are only going to have an email recommending retailers. So picture an email with different logos. So Saks Fifth Avenue, Ann Taylor, Tory Burch. And this is going to be the value of alpha. So alpha is going to be, what fraction of times does that retailer have to get recommended? And this is the percent loss. So if you have a small alpha, the difference from the unconstrained solution is fairly small. You can dial it up fairly high before you start seeing very big losses. Down here we have the number of retailers that get mentioned in the emails. So in the unconstrained solution, there's one retailer that minimum value here is only mentioned in 7 emails. That's not very good. Whereas you can see the effect of dialing up alpha. When I dial up alpha, the worst case, this gets mentioned 374 times. So clearly the constraints are working to help us out with that. All right. So I think there's a lot of additional research on this. Number one is, where do these alphas come from? So I'm going to give you my thoughts on that in the next 20 minutes. I think there's when you work with these optimization problems, you have to find a bound and I think maybe there's better ways of finding those bounds. We're not really sure. We've done the best we can at this point. So let me move on to the other presentation, which is, where do these alphas come from? So I've been working on this problem for just a few months, and I think my thinking is not. I'm not completely happy with it yet. So this is what we've done so far. So how do we pick these alphas that indicate how much love to share with a particular retailer? So as I mentioned, here are the characteristics of shop runner. So this is really what I have in mind. 180 retailers. We have 8 years of data, 10 million customers. A couple things I haven't told you about. There are 3 different ways that customers can get enrolled in this. So one way is that I'm on a retailer platform. So retailer website. I'm on Bloomingdales.com. I like this jacket, and I'm about to check out. So at the point of checkout, there will be a box that shows up and says, you can sign up for ShopRunner and get 2-day free shipping. So that's one of the most common ways that people sign up for this platform. Some people go directly to the ShopRunner website. That's pretty rare. Most of them come through one of the partner retailers. It's also offered as a benefit from various credit cards. So, for example, if you have an American Express account, you will get offered this service as a benefit, the ShopRunner service. Okay, another, I think, kind of important piece of information is this. ShopRunner negotiates with the retailer for a fraction of revenue. So any order that comes through ShopRunner is going to, say 5% of the revenue goes to ShopRunner for that order. So the reason this is important is that ShopRunner makes money through orders. And so the more orders they have, that's really their objective, is to have a lot of people ordering through the site. I'll just mention one more thing about the free 2-day shipping. The retailer has to cover those costs. So ShopRunner doesn't pay for the shipping, the retailer pays for the shipping. It's a bit of a sore point. I also think it's kind of important that with this, periodically the retailer has to renegotiate, okay, with ShopRunner. The retailer comes in and says, we're not happy, we're not getting enough customers. What does ShopRunner do? Well, right now all they can do is play the game of, well, we could lower our percentage that we take. I think the paper that I just showed you, that gives them another way to negotiate. So instead of saying, well, we'll just reduce from 5% to 4.5%, there could be a situation where the account representative says, well, we'll make sure you get more promotions through this new and improved recommendation system. Okay. One more thing about this, they do very little with recommendation systems right now. They're extremely primitive. All right, so I started to think about what's new about all this. I was just in Doha a couple weeks ago. We have a campus there, and of course one of the things you do when you're in Doha is you go to the souk. So the souk is the old market. And I couldn't help think, when I was walking around the souk, is this any different than ShopRunner? So what do you have at the souk? Well, this was like all the scarves. So I got scarf vendor 1, scarf vendor 2, and of course as a consumer, I go to one stall and I don't like the color. I go to the next stall and I see a color. Oh, that's the one that I want, and I buy that. And so the benefit of such a market is, I got all the scarf vendors in one place, and if I don't like one, I can, the search costs are very low for me. Or here we have all the pottery, and if I don't like one bowl, I can just go next door. Of course, the modern incarnation of this is the shopping mall, right? So these are popular around the world, and you have competitors co-located. I was talking to my wife about this, and my wife is from a small city in Germany called Passau. And she said, well, if you go to the old town, look at the street names. And so this is the old town. It's a 1,000-year-old town, and you have the Fischmarktgasse, which is I guess that's where all the fish vendors were. And then you have Großmeistergasse, which I think is where all the blacksmiths who made the knives and the probably other things. You have Milchgasse, I guess that was milk vendors were, and then you have Nagelgasse, which is up there, which is where they made nails, I guess. So there's nothing really new about this. Here's Chicago. If you go to Chicago, a very famous street called Western Avenue, and it's one car dealer after another. So if you're interested in buying a car, you go to Western Avenue, and if you don't like what OK Used Cars has, you go to the next one. All right, so then I think we have to consider about what is new about these multi-sided platforms. Number one is the virtual marketplace. So is geographic proximity important in this case? How hard is it for me to go from the Bloomingdale's website to the Neiman Marcus website? Not that hard. Okay? So I'm not sure that geographic proximity in a virtual space is as important, but we don't know. I think a thing that's also very new about these platforms is the data. Okay, so the owner of the souk knew nothing about which customers were buying from which specific retailers, In the case of an MSP, the MSP is kind of all-knowing. They know things that retailers have wanted to know for years, like share of wallet. Okay, so in the olden days, Bloomingdale's knows what I buy from Bloomingdale's. Bloomingdale's doesn't know what I buy from Neiman Marcus. The MSP knows that, right? So they know how I'm spreading my money around. Another thing that I think is very powerful is they know they can know at least, which retailers are very important to the network and which ones are not important, which gives them an advantage in a negotiation situation. So if I have some retailer complaining that they're not happy with the number of new customers, and I know because of my analysis of the network that retailer is really not pulling the weight, it's just exploiting the network, I can tell the retailer to go away. Or if there's a very important retailer, and I know that, the retailer may not know that, how important they are to the network, then I know that I have to really be nice to that retailer. All right? So it adds knowledge and information to the negotiating process. Let's think about this from the customer side. So what benefit does an MSP bring to consumers, or what possible benefit? Number one, I'm going to say, is reduced friction. Okay, that's a potential benefit. To me, I think Uber is a prime example of this, where I can land in a new country, not have any local currency, whip out my phone, ask for an Uber to take me to the hotel, and payment is all taken care of for me. I mean, another example I use for Uber is getting to the airport. In the olden days, I would take a taxi, and then you're late for the flight, and you're fumbling with the credit card and waiting for the thing to get approved, and I want to get through security. With Uber, all that is removed. So reduced friction has to be a big deal to consumers. Another possible benefit is improved product recommendations. So the souk wasn't recommending scarf vendors to me, but today, an MSP, in theory, if they have good data, and they may not have good data, can know about all of the items at all the retailers. So if I'm looking for a scarf and I'm not finding what I like, because they have this view across all the retailers, they can step in and recommend a scarf from a different retailer that I may like. So that's another benefit to consumers. Another possible benefit is a standardized customer experience. So you go to different websites and you get, you have different interfaces, and that's a bit of a problem. You could have a better, consistent interface. Think Google. One of the prime examples of a great platform is Google News. So for a reading experience, Google News is just a delight because I can customize it. There's good personalization in there as well, and it just beats any newspaper's interface and recommendation system hands down. I find that most newspapers have very primitive ones, but Google centralizes, or Google Maps is another. Don't try to do maps yourself, let Google do it for you. And then you also have easy price comparisons, would be a benefit to consumers, not necessarily to retailers. Okay, so ShopRunner currently does little with any of this. It's a startup, and they're putting out a lot of fires. So here's some questions that I have in service of answering the, what is alpha sub R? So how does a multi-sided platform benefit or challenge a retailer? Is the benefit uniform for all retailers? Or do some retailers benefit more from being in the platform than others? Is it harmful or beneficial to be in a network with your direct competitor? So in the souk, my direct competitor selling roughly the same scarves was right across the road, and that's okay. Is that true in a virtual platform? What other variables influence the benefit to the customers? What are the moderators? What types of retailers are most desirable? So this is one of the questions that ShopRunner had for us is, if I'm going to get some new retailers, I have a limited sales force, which types of retailers should I be bringing into this network? And then the last question is how to promote different retailers and brands to the users. So I think these are very complicated questions. So it doesn't lend itself to a simple model. Here's some observations that I want to make about the strategy. So talked about the revenue before. I think the overall goal of the MSP should be to become a destination. Okay, so if I have a search, I automatically go to Google, and that gives Google a lot of power. Right? So that should be the goal of an MSP is to be that first destination that sends people out. All right. So the more reasons that I have to go to the MSP, the better it is for the MSP. And remember, they make their money through sales. So all right. If a customer always goes to the same retailer, I don't need an MSP. So if I always buy from Bloomingdale's, why would I go through ShopRunner? Bloomingdale's should make it easy enough for me to go to their website and enjoy that loyalty. Okay, so the benefit of an MSP is not through just linking me up with my favorite retailer. The benefit of the MSP is to spread me across retailers. So as a general rule of thumb, the MSPs should be promoting these network effects, where I can shop across the network. I'll just mention one more point. If a retailer is sufficiently big, it doesn't need an MSP. It just it's a destination on its own right, or it becomes an MSP. Think of Amazon. So I'll just show one interesting screenshot here. In the U.S., 5 minutes. Sorry, I promised to get out. Southwest Airlines, you're going to see is 10 minutes. Sorry. Southwest Airlines does not allow itself to be listed on any online travel agent. Okay, so I do a search for a flight on Google Flights and it doesn't come up. I go to Orbitz or Expedia, it doesn't come up. And so Southwest have said, we're not going to play in the platforms, which I think is kind of an interesting situation. So, all right. I've run a series of analyses to help me answer some of these questions. So I'll quickly share what we've done so far. And again, I think we're nibbling around the answer, but I don't feel like we've hit it directly. So as you've seen from my presentation yesterday, I love natural experiments. Natural experiments are kind of clean, and so I kind of start off my search for an answer through natural experiments. So it turns out we had a beautiful natural experiment in our data set. So Bloomingdale's joined the network on March 1st, 2017. There were existing big retailers like Neiman Marcus and Saks Fifth Avenue in the network, but this provided me a perfect setting to understand what happens when your biggest competitor moves in right next to you. Okay, so we're gonna analyze that question. Here's a framework. So I'm going to call this the extant retailer. So think about Neiman Marcus. Neiman Marcus has been in the network for years. And so what determines Neiman Marcus's revenue this period? Revenue orders, whatever you want. Orders is slightly cleaner in that some retailers sell high price things, low price things. So you can focus on either dependent variable, they're highly correlated with each other. So what's going to determine that? Well, of course, the revenue in the current period. So the current period meaning before Bloomingdale's, the biggest competitor, joins the network. What else is going to determine that? Well, exogenous factors like weather and seasonality. When it's Christmas, lots of people buy stuff at Neiman Marcus, but not so much in February. Okay, but then there's this new retailer joining the network, and there's going to be different moderators. So I'm going to hypothesize the following. I'm going to say that there's basically three types of moderators. I'm going to call them orthogonal retailers. So an orthogonal retailer to Bloomingdale's is Newegg. Okay, so Newegg sells computers. Computers are completely unrelated to what Bloomingdale's sells, so it's unrelated. Flowers.com. I would never go to Bloomingdale's to buy flowers. What I hypothesize then is a null effect. So in other words, when Bloomingdale's comes in, revenues for flowers.com are unaffected. You have direct competitors. So in the case of Bloomingdale's, the direct competitors would be the other big department stores. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen. My hypothesis is that you're going to get a positive effect. Okay, and the reason for this is the network effect. You know, it's like the soup. I want a scarf. It's much easier to, there's more customers, bigger, set of customers, and I can trade off. There's another category that I'm going to subdivide. I'm going to call this the carried brand. So I have things like Under Armour in my data set. So Under Armour is an athletic wear vendor. You can go to the Under Armour store. Under Armour is also carried at Bloomingdale's. Okay, so what happens there? And I'm going to hypothesize a positive effect, but I'm not quite sure on that one. There's a close cousin to this, which is the direct substitute. So I could have another, Columbia also sells athletic wear. Maybe Bloomingdale's doesn't carry Columbia, but it's a direct substitute. I could go to Bloomingdale's or I could go to Columbia for basically the same running jacket. All right. So here's the basic setup of the natural experiment. Bloomingdale's joins on March 1st. We're going to compute some RFM measures back here. We have a pre-period where we track orders from the extant retailer. We have this shock where Bloomingdale's joins the system. We're going to have a couple-month period here where we observe whether a customer self-selects into treatment. So the treatment is they go shop at Bloomingdale's. I start out at Neiman Marcus, I switch over to Bloomingdale's, versus the control group where they don't shop at Bloomingdale's. I start at Neiman Marcus and I don't go to the big competitor. Then I have a post period. So it's going to be another basic diff and diff. So we have the 4 types of extant retailers. We ran this for a lot of individual retailers, and this is going to be the effect on the extant brand. So what you're going to see is with Neiman Marcus and Saks Fifth Avenue, you get positive effects. The biggest competitor comes in, moves in right next door. These other retailers do better. So it's like all the boats rise. Let's go down to the bottom, which is where you have orthogonal retailers. So I mentioned Newegg before and other ones. I don't really understand this negative effect. It's borderline significant, so maybe it's just spurious. But we're getting a slight negative effect for Newegg joining. Here you have different substitutes and carried brands. And for the most part, there's no effect. In one case, Tory Burch is a retailer for women's clothing. You see a positive effect very similar to what you'd get with Neiman Marcus or Saks. All right, so what it looks like is happening here is that you have, the direct competitors are getting better and nobody else is. Okay, we've also looked at this from a perspective of a network. So you can think of, this is the actual picture of the ShopRunner network. Each one of these dots is a retailer. The arrows indicate flows of customers. So in other words, if a customer comes in as a customer of this retailer and then decides to shop at this other retailer, that would be a flow. It's an asymmetric network. So some of these will lose more customers than they gain. So you can think of this as a network. Then you can start to apply standard network measures. So like we have a measure called out referral. So out referral is a position where customers who come through that retailer get sent out to many other retailers. So from an MSP's perspective, these would be very desirable retailers because they're sharing their customers with many other retailers that make the whole network better. So here's a situation where you've got a centrally located node that's sending customers to all these other retailers. Here's a situation where this is a bridging retailer that bridges disparate parts of the network. Then you have an isolated retailer. So this is also called high constraint, where you have a retailer that's way off on the periphery of the network. Okay, so these are different types of retailers that we have. How much time do I have? Not much? All right, 1 minute, and we'll stop. Basically, what we find through with a bunch of lags, the retailers that are very centrally located increase the revenue of other retailers. The isolated ones don't do very well. We've fitted some Markov chain models, and what these Markov chain models do is they basically show that the retailers kind of get sucked into the big department stores. So let me kind of conclude here. What my analyses have shown, is that we're not seeing a lot of benefits for the carried brands or the isolated retailers. The big ones do really well in this network. The little guys don't do so well. So where I think ShopRunner needs to go is to they need to show more love to the niche retailers and to the carried brands, because if those ones are smart, they wouldn't be in this network. They're losing more customers than they're gaining. And they probably need to pick other categories. What I'm finding is that ShopRunner has done a really good job in owning the big department store. They're not doing a very good job in any other category in what we've seen. So, whatever they can do through their promotion system to kind of grow those is probably where they need to go. So it's not a perfect answer to how do I figure out who to promote, but we're kind of nibbling around the edges. So thank you very much.
I have so many questions, but I will only ask one.
Lunch. We need to have lunch.
Yes. Many people are talking about recommending systems that are creating polarization of the spirits, always recommending the same. And I was thinking, in your model, maybe it could translate into corner solutions. And I was asking myself, did you see that? And maybe this parameter alpha, was it any intervening aspects or, any influence of alpha on it?
So it's a great question about the polarization part. I think another application of this is in recommending news articles. So instead of only recommending right-wing articles to you, I could use this exact same model to make sure there's diversity in what I recommend to you. The problem with it that's quite hard is classifying whether an article is leaning one way or the other. If it's right-wing or left-wing. It's not as simple as you might think. But that's something we've mentioned in our possible, implication section of how this could be used elsewhere. I know there's like public broadcasting systems in Europe that actually, it's written into their mission that there has to be a diversity of viewpoints or something, and so this could be a solution to meeting that problem.
Il y a une deuxième question qui sera la dernière. Thank you for your very interesting presentation. So I had one reflection that I wanted to share and one question. The first was sort of marketer's reflection on the model you presented in the beginning of your presentation. So you said that diversity constraint, it led to sacrificing utility a little bit for customers. Well, from the marketer's point of view, I wanted just to say that your basic assumption is that the utility of each item for each customer is given at the very beginning, but maybe in real life it's not the case. So maybe from marketing point of view, you actually optimize the real world utility by bringing diversity in the selection. So maybe you could share your viewpoint on this question. And the second question was on becoming a destination for MSPs, you said it was the final goal for each MSP. Do you believe a real destination can emerge when we have Amazon, we have Google, we have existing very powerful destinations online for customers? Thank you.
Yeah, the first question's a great one, and it's. I think very often the research community has focused on what is easy rather than realistic. Okay, so it's very easy for me to estimate. The Netflix challenge is one of the perfect examples of this, where you're trying to minimize the mean squared error of my estimate of how much you like a movie. Okay, but there's a lot of situations where you're not just buying one thing; you're buying a basket. And so a classic example would be a list of songs, a playlist on Spotify. So maybe I have a certain utility for one song, but in the context of a playlist that I'm working out to at the gym, I have a different utility for that, which is I now have to estimate the utility of that whole basket, and that's an active area of research, fairly new research in recommendation systems to come up with metrics that capture the utility for a basket of goods. Your second question was about there's so many big players out there, can another one come in? That's an interesting question to me, because to me, ShopRunner would have been unthinkable 10 years ago. But I think the reason ShopRunner has a chance is because all of these retailers are scared to death of Amazon. And so this is they want to have another power center beyond just Amazon, because they're worried Amazon Amazon bought up Whole Foods and they're kind of taking over the world, and so I think that's why these retailers have participated in this thing, which they may not have done 10 years ago. Is my opinion.
So thank you so much, Ed, for coming to this conference, but also for your presentation. I think this is what we call high standard research. I have just a question about your databases. How do you manage to have access to this kind of data? Because you know that here in France, it is very, very tough for us to have access to this kind of data. And we know that if you want to publish in good journals, like in what you call here in France, CNRS1 journals like GM1 or JM or something like that, you have to use this kind of data. And so we'd like just to know, how do you manage? Do you have partnerships with companies, or how do you manage to have access?
So the answer is, I have a brother. He's not my real brother, but he's as close as a brother. So in my department, we have many people who worked in industry for many years, and were senior executives, and then they come over and become professors. And so this guy started the same year as me, so he's about 20 years older than me. His name's Tom Collinger, and I joke that Tom knows everybody on the planet. He sits on all these boards and all that, and he is my brother. So he is my complete complement, in that he knows people at companies, and we also have a lot of great alumni from our program who now have senior jobs, who also give us data. So I get data through Tom, and then I'm kind of the other half, which does, I know a bunch of researchers who are really smart, and then I partner with them, like Robin and Nurske and all the people that I mentioned on this. So we're both sort of hubs, but we connect two disparate networks. And that's the ideal situation. So do that. Make friends with a senior practitioner who can